Napoleon was a good movie, I guess. It also had a lot of bad in it as well, so let's talk about this movie. As always, this video will have spoilers, even though this is a biopic and you can kind of just go look up the spoilers. But anyways, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Napoleon. So essentially in this movie, we follow the life of Napoleon as we jump through time and go to some of his greatest battles, and we also follow his relationship off the battlefield with his wife Josephine and how that affects him both on and off the battlefield. Jumping right into the good, and the first thing I have for this is that the battle scenes of this movie were easily the best part. I mean, the sheer scale of all of these scenes was just amazing. This movie did a great job at showing how great of a battle strategist that Napoleon was, and also showing that he was pretty imperfect as well, as he made a lot of mistakes. And I think the best part of all of these battle scenes is just how real they made them feel. I mean, not only was the scale just huge, and it didn't really look like they used any CGI in any of these scenes, it was just a bunch of extras, which is another feat in itself. But when you watch these scenes, you really experience the battlefield in this movie. For instance, there is a battle scene in the middle of this movie. I forget exactly what the battle was called, but it was the battle where he trapped that army on the ice and then proceeded to break the ice with cannonballs and sink them into the freezing cold water. And this was by far my favorite scene of the entire movie. From the way this scene was shot to showing just how far Napoleon would go to win a battle was just great. And as I said before, this was my favorite part in the entire movie, and this was really what all the battle scenes were like. I mean, it showed strategy and the violence of Napoleon, and my only gripe with the battle scenes is that they weren't longer, because they were kind of short in my opinion, and I just wish they were a little bit longer because they were so good. Next up for the good, I have the performances by Joaquin and Vanessa Kirby. Now, both of these two I thought turned in really solid performances. They really took these two characters and Josephine and Napoleon and really made them their own, and I can respect that. Now, individually, I thought they both turned in really good performances, but they really shined when they were both together on screen. They had great chemistry and they bounced off each other really well. And considering that about like 80% of this movie is just dialogue between the two and is about the relationship between Josephine and Napoleon, I thought they did a pretty solid job in those parts. Now getting into the so-so, and the first thing I have here is the relationship of Josephine and Napoleon. Now, going into this movie, I did think it was going to be more about the battles and kind of war history of Napoleon, but this movie, as I said before, is about 80% the relationship between Josephine and Napoleon, about 10 to 15% battles, and then that last 5% is like political stuff with Napoleon and things like that. So this movie did put a lot of attention on Napoleon and his wife, and although some parts of that story were good, I do wish we would have gotten less of it. And that is no knock to Vanessa Kirby and Joaquin. I just think their relationship took up a lot of this movie, and at times it felt more like a romantic drama than a movie about a war general. Again, not all of the relationship scenes were bad. I guess it was pretty solid overall. I just wish it was a little bit more even between the relationship scenes and the battle scenes, considering this is a Napoleon movie and he's known for his battle strategies. And next for the so-so, and this is just more of a nitpick, but there were no accents in this movie. And I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't think about this during the movie, but at the end of the day, it was really no big deal. It didn't lessen my experience with this film at all. It was really during those first 20 minutes where I was kind of like, oh, okay, we're not doing accents in this movie. But I quickly got over it and moved on with this movie. And finally, let's get into the bad. And the first thing I have here is that this movie does have a pacing problem. Now, this movie is about 2 hours and 30 minutes or so, which is pretty standard for a movie nowadays, but it felt so much longer than that. And this is coming from a guy who sat through Killers of the Flower Moon and enjoyed it all the way through. This movie, standing at only 2.5 hours, felt just as long as Killers of the Flower Moon. This movie just didn't flow all that well at all, and considering that there is a 4-hour cut of this movie out there, they may have had to cut out a couple of things, and that may have messed with the pacing a little bit. And also there were some parts in this movie that I felt were just super drawn out and honestly just downright boring at some times. And yeah, overall, I think this movie could have been cut just maybe a little bit differently to not make it feel longer than it actually was. Because by the end of this movie, I was honestly just kind of waiting for this thing to be done. And finally, for the bad, I have the kind of time jumping that this movie did. Now, this movie does cover a long period of time, so I guess time jumping is pretty necessary, but it was really at the moments that they did it at, which is why I think the pacing felt a little off in this movie. It was really prevalent at the beginning, which made it really tough for me to settle into this movie. I mean, at times it just kind of felt like we were jumping from event to event in Napoleon's life, and there was really no flow to this story. I mean, at times it really just felt like I was just watching things happen instead of following like a real storyline in this movie. And in my opinion, I feel like if they would have just focused on a small portion of Napoleon's life, I think this movie may have been just a little bit better in regards to pacing and a little bit easier to follow instead of jumping around to what felt like random points in his life. So overall, Napoleon is just okay. It's got some good and it's got some bad. Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby were pretty good in this movie, and the battle scenes, which is something I wish we got more of, were absolutely phenomenal. But at the end of the day, I think this is a movie that definitely didn't reach its potential. Those are my thoughts on Napoleon. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.